In this video, I'm going to talk about creating visual representations of data for a factorial between subjects design. And I'm going to talk about error bars, and I'm going to talk about bar charts. And I'm also going to talk about the inclusion or exclusion of confidence intervals. And I'm also going to talk about the distinction between estimated marginal means and the observed means and standard deviations and confidence intervals, for example. So the data that I've got here are the video game data. And several of the charts that I show in this chapter are bar charts, and I suspect because that's perhaps the most common way to display the data for a factorial between subjects ANOVA. And I'm going to show you how to do that. You go to Graphs Chart Builder, and you'll get this prompt saying you haven't specified all your variables in terms of their measurement. You can ignore that if you feel confident, or you can specify the measurement levels for each variable. Now, for the main effects, if you want to display main effect means, you're going to want to use this option here. So if you double click, it shows up here. It's called a simple bar count is the default. And you'll want to change that to a mean. Simple bar mean. And the dependent variable's punishment, and that goes on the y-axis. So the dependent variable goes on the y-axis. And you might have game type as one main effect, and you put that variable here. And you can click OK. If you click OK, you're not going to get the confidence intervals, and that might be your preference for a particular circumstance. So if I click OK, I get this bar chart that doesn't look very good because the bars are so fat. Now you can decrease the size of the bars by double clicking on the chart and then double clicking again, and you can see bar options. Click on that tab and you can reduce it down to something like 50%. And then click Apply. And that looks a little bit better. You'd also probably want to get rid of this title, because in a manuscript you'd have it written in the actual manuscript, not as part of the chart. And if you click on that once and then you click again, you can then replace that game type. And if you click on that, if you double click on the bar labels, you can then change the font to bold. I think bold is usually the best option. You can change these, click on that, text style. You can change the font size to 11 and then change that to bold. Then if you click on number format, get rid of the decimal places. And here you might write something like noise blast level or something like that. Still doesn't look quite right. I think most charts look best when they're actually in a square format. So I double click and then double click again. Now I want to change the chart size, and I think I'm going to put it to something like 5.0 to 5.0. I'm not going to maintain the aspect ratio. I've changed it. There we go. Now I'm going to get rid of these lines here. Double click on them and then get rid of the line like that. This still seems a little bit big. The bars seem very pronounced. I think I'll change the color to something a lot lighter like that. And the borders are black apparently. Might increase the border to about a 1. There we go. That's looking a bit better. I'm also going to click on here and change that line thickness to 1 and change this line thickness to 1. There we go. So now we have the main effect for game type, violent versus non-violent, in a bar chart. We might change the scale from, I can't remember if it was from 0 to 10. Go to scale, and let's just say 10 is the maximum that goes. It actually bumped my minimum to 4, so I'm going to go back to 0, and I want to have 1 as my major increments. I don't want 11 to show up, so I'm going to get rid of this upper margin. You can play around with that. I think I'll go with a 2% upper margin. See that it gets rid of the 11 up here. So something like this might be how you present these data. Maybe 0 isn't the actual minimum. Maybe it's a 1, so you'd change that again. This is getting close to publication quality. You might reduce the size again. It's probably a little bit big for something like this. There we go. This is a perfectly good bar chart. Now it's based on the observed means in the data. It's not based on the estimated marginal means when you go this route. You can, what I didn't do is I don't have confidence intervals, but you can add that pretty easily by just making sure you click on display error bars. But now I'd have to do all that touching up stuff again to make it look like this with the error bars. I'm not going to bother with that right now, but these are the error bars that you get. But I could, I can't help myself, just clean that up a little bit. Style 12 and bold. It's not all the changes I did, but it's something comparable to here, but it includes the confidence intervals as well. And a lot of people would present the chart with the confidence intervals. It's up to you. You can have it look like this or look like this with the confidence intervals. So that's the main effect, and again, that's based on the observed mean and the observed confidence intervals for the data. It's not the estimated marginal means. And let me just do quickly the bar chart for the main effect of gender. That's easy. You just pull that out of there and then put sex in here, and then you'd have the bar chart. It looks terrible. You'd have to do some work to improve it, but that would be the main effect for gender, not based on the estimated marginal means, but based on the observed means. Now the interaction would almost always be displayed in a bar chart as well, and that has to be done a little bit differently. You have to use I don't know if you have to, but one way to get this done, let me just clear the canvas, is to use this here, clustered bar chart. So if you double click on that, I've now got a different style of bar chart. I want mean, don't want the count. I just have to put punishment into here and sex into here and game type into the cluster. Now I can put game type here and sex up here. It's up to you, however you want to tell the story. But this is how I've done it for this one. And let's click on OK. And here is the chart, which looks similar to the chart I reported in the textbook with male, showing quite a substantial difference between violent and non-violent. And that was where the interaction was. So if you look at the difference between violent and non-violent for females, only a small difference. And then you get this big difference here for males. So the impact of playing a violent video game or not on the punishment levels that people administer is much more pronounced for males when they play a violent video game versus not, in comparison to females. There's almost no difference for females. Now, again, I could get this chart done with confidence intervals if I clicked on this option here. And here it is with the confidence intervals. And again, I'd have to clean this up because it's nowhere near publication quality, in my opinion. It looks terrible. So get rid of these lines. And then we'd probably want to change the colors here to bar chart options down to 50. And we want the blue ones to be a color. Whoop. We probably want those to be that level of gray, say. And we want these ones to be possibly near black. So you just close, and then double click on the red, and double click again, and then click once. And then you've got this one. I might, what should I use here? I'll use a darker color. Looks possibly a bit green, but you choose whatever color you like. And we'd also want to make this smaller. Get rid of this first. Sometimes you might get rid of your label for your x-axis, like here it says sex. People can pretty much figure out that male and female probably means sex. I'll keep it there anyway. And change this up a little bit. Don't want the decimal places, but 0. Text style 12 bold. And again, you'd maybe like noise blast. This is changed again, scale 0 to 10. Change that to 2. Let's change that to how about the opposite. Probably 80 is about right. That seems too far. Overall, the chart's too big. Let's decrease the size of that to 5.0 by 5.0. Way too much. Probably move your legend into and change the font. It's a bit tedious making charts, but people really appreciate them when they're done well. Oops, that kind of made it small. Kind of have to make it a bit bigger again. Then it shows up. That's a trick there. It does disappear. So something like this. Change the lines, thickness, or weighting. Anyway, that's, you probably still want to play with that. Looks like they actually don't have the border. Border weight 1. There we go. So that's not a bad chart. Still a bit tall, I think. Yeah, maybe something like that. Again, it's a bit of a judgment call. So that's the interaction plot of the means in a bar chart. Now again, these are based on the descriptive statistics, and when it comes to the interaction, there's no difference between the estimated marginal means and the descriptive statistic means, because it's broken down into the smallest cell size possible. So this is a pretty good representation if you wanted the confidence intervals with the presentation of the means. Now, if the other option of displaying means associated with a factorial between subjects ANOVA is to use something called profile plots. So thus far I've only shown you bar charts, which is a perfectly acceptable approach to presenting data from between subjects ANOVA. Profile plots are done in SPSS automatically, so you can save yourself time, a little bit of time, if you go the profile plots option. So you end up doing the 2x2, in this case 2x2 factorial ANOVA, and then click on plots and put game type into the horizontal axis add. That's going to create a chart for the game type main effect, and sex goes in there. And these are going to be based on the estimated marginal means. They're not going to be based on the descriptive statistics means. And I've mentioned before that because SPSS's default is sums of squares type 3 in the ANOVA framework, that it's actually doing the analysis based on the estimated marginal mean. So arguably, maybe you should present the results in graphical form with the estimated marginal means. This is the option you would go with if you wanted to do that. So here's the option to include the error bars. If you have version of 25 or higher in SPSS, if you have an older version, I don't think you'll see this option. Now, if you want the interaction, you have to put game type into one of these options and then sex into separate lines. That's one version of the interaction displayed. Or you can present sex in horizontal axis and game type in separate lines. It's a different side of the same coin, so to speak. It's not a different interaction. It's the same interaction. It's just displayed in a slightly different way. So if I click on continue and OK, SPSS produces the results as I mentioned and I covered in a previous video, but it also includes here estimated marginal means of punishment. This isn't going to be based, as I mentioned in the previous video, on the descriptive statistic means. I should actually show that just briefly, just to remind you what I'm talking about. Whoop. click on estimated marginal means. I'll take all those versus options and getting descriptive statistics. These means when the sample sizes are unequal across the groups, 8, 9, 11, 11, when they are different across groups, they're not exactly, the marginal means and the descriptive statistic means won't be exactly the same. So these are the estimated marginal means here. Again, I talked about that a little bit in the previous video. So here is the error bar chart of the main effect for game type. So I previously showed that above over here. Game type, this is the main effect of game type presented in a bar chart, perfectly legitimate, and this is based on the descriptive statistic means. This here is essentially the same effect, but it's based on the estimated marginal means, and it's presented in a error bar chart. Now I'm going to clean that up a bit, get rid of these lines, get rid of this title because I would include a different title in the actual manuscript. The game type. So you just have to keep clicking on things. You just click that once and then you can change things with it. Or if you click it another time, then you can actually change the words itself. I just want to keep it the same. Put that in bold and change this scale from 0 to 10, margin 5, that's fine, and number format 2, I want 0 decimal places, and 12, and bold. Noise, blast, level. Again, you just click on it once, and you click it on again. This is if you're right-handed with your index finger, and then you can actually manipulate these things, change the size, change the font. Now this obviously is a very big chart, way too wide, so I'm going to reduce the size to something like 4.5 by 4.5. See what that looks like. Not bad, and probably pretty close to very good. Probably change the lines here to being again a little bit thicker. I also like to change this line here. I mentioned in the textbook that it's inappropriate that SPSS does this. It's inappropriate from the perspective that this is usually how you represent it within subject mean. The line suggests that you go from time 1 to time 2. Well, there is no time, so I'd get rid of that line by clicking on it and then clicking on this and then click apply. Gone. I'd probably change these little dots to something a little bit more impressive. So I'm going to create the size to 8, and I'm going to get rid of the fill. And then I've got 2 circles. I'd probably increase the overall weighting of these, of any and all this. I'd probably put up to 1.5. That looks better. Whoop. And weighting 1.5. Not bad. So this is still a little bit big. Reduce the size a little bit. So this is a representation of the main effect of violent versus nonviolent, depicting a statistically significant effect. And this bar chart is the same representation. It's based on the descriptive statistic means, as I've mentioned before, not the estimated marginal means. And it's presented in a bar chart. Which one you prefer is up to you. You can decide to show. To be honest, I probably prefer overall this approach when it comes to main effects. Showing them in this type of format is preferable. When it gets to interactions, though, I think you're probably better off showing them in bar chart format, because especially if you have confidence intervals associated with your analysis. So in this case here, the interaction is depicted with a profile plot, and there's a lot of overlap. So when you look at this here, this is one way to depict the interaction in a I'll try to improve it. Won't go far. I'll get rid of this line here. Get rid of that. You also would want to get rid of these lines here, so let me get rid of these lines first. That's not going to do it all at once. There we go. Click on it once. Click again, and then you can get rid of them. So it's a little bit of a problem that to have this over here so overlapped like this. And so in my opinion, interactions are probably best depicted in a graphical format with bars, and I think that was achieved here. So this bar chart here, male, female, separated across violent, non-violent, is actually the same as this. And to me, you can't talk about it. It's just, in my opinion, not as good. I'd prefer to have this one here. And the issue of marginal means, estimated marginal means, and descriptive statistic observed means is not an issue here because they are going to be the same. It's only for main effects that the estimated marginal means become different when you have unequal sample sizes in the smaller cells. So that's me talking a bit about bar charts for a factorial between subjects design. It's actually pretty long, pretty detailed to actually deal with all the issues with respect to error bars versus bar charts, main effects versus interactions, and also estimated marginal means versus descriptive statistics means. But have a go and listen to this video again if you feel the need, and I hope you found it useful.